The man who set the stage for the Billy Graham Crusades with his music, George Beverly Shea, passed away late last night. News 13's Victoria Dunkel is live in Montreat this morning. And Victoria, Shea traveled the world with Billy Graham for decades.
Absolutely, Holly. I mean, you say Billy Graham Crusades, you also know George Beverly Shea. I mean, he was the voice. He provided the music. He provided the uplifting elements of that. He was 104 years old, and he died last night in Asheville. We're here live in Montreat, the community he called home for years. They lived, actually, he and the Reverend Graham lived just down the road from each other. But as I said, he provided the uplifting soundtrack for the Billy Graham Crusades.
Jesus loves me, that wherever I may go.
Shea and Billy Graham met in the 1940s in Chicago. That was when the Reverend Graham was just getting started in his ministry, and he heard George Beverly Shea, who was working for Moody Radio at the time. They got together. He invited George Beverly Shea to join him on a crusade, and he, Shea, and musical director Cliff Barrows were on together for the first time in 1947. That relationship lasted all the way through until now, and they traveled together. More than 100 countries visited, every continent on the planet. More than 200 million people were reached and touched directly by these crusades over the years. The community will remember him. And even with all those accolades, Grammy Awards, national honors, international recognition, Shea, through it all, remained humble.
I'd sung live to 220 million people. And you can laugh at that because they didn't come to hear me. They come to hear Billy. But it's nice to have, you know.
And this morning we have heard from the Reverend Billy Graham in comments that he has made in recent years about George Beverly Shea. He called him Bev. They were best of friends. He said he was one of the most humble men I have ever known and one of my closest friends. I loved him as a brother. Again, the singer George Beverly Shea has passed away at the age of 104 after a brief illness, and we will be following the information and release the details of funeral arrangements once the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association releases that to us. Reporting live in Montreat, Victoria Dunkel, News 13.
People around the world are waking up to news of longtime music evangelist George Beverly Shea's death. News 13's Victoria Dunkel is live this morning in Montreat, and Victoria, Shea passed away late last night.
He did, Holly. We got word that he passed away after a brief illness. He died in Asheville. We're out here live in Montreat, which is a community he called home for years. In fact, he lived just down the road from the Reverend Billy Graham, and they were the best of friends. They became co-workers in the crusade efforts in 1947, and Shea's voice really became his calling card.
Jesus loves me.
The Reverend Billy Graham said, and I'm quoting him, "I would feel lost getting up to preach if Bev were not there to prepare the way through an appropriate song." And many of you have been sharing your memories of the George Beverly Shea and his impact through his ministry there on our Facebook page and on my Facebook page as well. I want to share, Robert Thompson said he was a wonderful man that he was blessed by sitting and talking with him one afternoon. Another mention here is Carol Wolf said that he was a great man of God, and I can remember hearing him sing at a Billy Graham service in Miami Beach when she was about 11 years old. And many of us who have seen the Crusades over the years do remember when he would take the stage with his big booming voice and really fill auditoriums all around the world. 220 million plus people have heard and been ministered to by the voice of George Beverly Shea. Again, he passed away late last night at the age of 104, and we are waiting for word from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association as for the funeral arrangements, but we'll let you know what those are just as soon as we get them. Reporting live in Montreat, Victoria Dunkel, News 13.
The man who set the stage for the Reverend Billy Graham at his crusades, George Beverly Shea, passed away late last night. News 13's Victoria Dunkel is live this morning in Montreat. And Vic, is it safe to say that millions of people are remembering this great singer?
It really is. That's not an exaggeration by any means, Holly. He sang on every continent on this planet, and he spoke and sang at crusades that were hosted for decades, more than 50 years traveling with the Reverend Billy Graham. And we're outside a church where he sang on many occasions here in Montreat, which is his hometown. George Beverly Shea passed away last night. He was 104 years old. He'd had a brief illness, and the Reverend Billy Graham had called him one of his dearest friends and said he loved him like a brother. Shea really set the stage and provided a soundtrack for these crusades.
Jesus loves me.
That rich, booming voice is what caught the attention of the Reverend Billy Graham in the 1940s. They met in Chicago in 1947. George Beverly Shea joined the Reverend Graham on the Crusades, and they became a partnership that reached out to millions of people over decades throughout the world, and in televised crusades that we've all seen. In fact, people are sharing so many great memories of that. Again, another comment from the Reverend Billy Graham is that he would feel lost getting up to preach if Bev were not there to prepare the way through appropriate song. But Shea often said that he knew that the presidents and the dignitaries were there to meet the Reverend Billy Graham. He held on to his humility. He remained humble.
I'd sung live to 220 million people. And you can laugh at that because they didn't come to hear me. They come to hear Billy. But it's nice to have, you know.
While he said that, there were millions of people who did come to hear Shea as well. He's referred to on our Facebook page from folks, a godly legacy in this man. Many people talking about how they had a chance to meet him in backstage at crusades and so on. And they shared great stories. One person even said that she remembered how her pastor had shared that Shea had been offered a chance to do mainstream music, but he turned that down so that he could do what God had called him to do. And his life and legacy at 104 years old will not be forgotten. We'll let you know about the funeral arrangements once they are announced. Reporting live in Montreat, Victoria Dunkel, News 13.